The world before the fall was a symphony of ordinary noises. It was the gentle hum of a refrigerator in a quiet kitchen. It was the distant wail of a siren, a sound so common it barely registered. People moved through their lives with a comfortable, unthinking rhythm. They woke up, they went to work, they complained about the traffic on the evening commute, never realizing what a gift that traffic was. It was a sign of life, of order, of a society that functioned. Children's laughter filled playgrounds, their biggest concern a scraped knee or a forgotten piece of homework. We took it all for granted, this fragile peace. We assumed the sun would always rise on a world that made sense. Mornings were filled with the smell of brewing coffee and toasted bread. People scrolled through news on their phones, their minds occupied with trivialities, celebrity gossip, political squabbles, the rise and fall of stock prices. These were the pillars of our reality, the things we believed were important. We built our lives on the assumption that the system would hold. The grocery stores would always be stocked, the taps would always have clean water, the lights would always turn on with the flip of a switch. It was a collective dream, a shared delusion of permanence that we never thought to question until it was far too late. We were sleepwalking toward the edge of a cliff, smiling the whole way down. The concerns that once dominated our days now seemed like luxuries from a forgotten kingdom. We worried about deadlines and bills. We planned vacations months in advance, debating between a beach or a mountain retreat. We argued over sports teams and movie endings. There was a beautiful, simple predictability to it all. The structure of our society was a massive, intricate machine that we trusted implicitly. It was built by generations before us, and we believed it was indestructible. Its gears turned smoothly, powered by our collective faith. We never bothered to look at the rust forming in the hidden corners, the stress fractures appearing under the surface. Human connection was both vast and shallow. We were linked by invisible networks, able to speak to someone on the other side of the planet in an instant. Yet, we often felt isolated in a crowd. We shared memes and digital pleasantries, but avoided eye contact with the strangers sitting next to us on the bus. We had millions of friends online but didn't know our neighbors' names. This strange paradox of being hyper-connected yet deeply alone was the signature of our time. We had forgotten the importance of a handshake, of a shared meal, of looking someone in the eye and seeing the humanity staring back. We would soon learn that lesson in the cruelest way imaginable. It began not with a bang, but with a whisper. On the fringes of the news, there were reports of a new, aggressive flu strain. They called it the crimson flu because of the way it turned the whites of the eyes a terrifying blood-red color. At first, the experts were reassuring. They told us it was containable. They urged calm and advised simple hygiene. Wash your hands, avoid large gatherings. We listened, but we did not truly hear. The reports were background noise, another crisis in a world already full of them. We had grown numb to warnings, desensitized by a constant barrage of potential catastrophes that never materialized. This time, however, was different. The spread was impossibly fast. It moved like wildfire on a dry plain. A cough in a crowded subway car could condemn 100 souls. A handshake could seal a death warrant. The virus didn't just kill, it changed people. In the final stages, the fever would spike, cooking the brain until all that remained was a primal, twitching rage. The higher functions, reason, memory, love, were burned away. They became something else. Not zombies from old horror films, but something worse. They were vessels of pure, unthinking aggression, driven by a single instinct to spread the infection to any living thing they could find. Their humanity was gone, replaced by a horrifying, crimson-eyed hunger. Panic was the second wave of the pandemic. It hit harder and faster than the virus itself. The official reassurances crumbled into contradictory statements and then, finally, silence. People saw the truth not on their television screens, but in their own neighborhoods. They saw their neighbors, their friends, their family members succumb to the fever. They saw the change. The first time you see someone you know, someone you love, look at you with those blood-red eyes and a snarl on their lips. Something inside you breaks. Trust in the system evaporated overnight. The only authority left was the instinct to survive, and it was a cruel, selfish master. Governments responded with quarantines that were too little, too late. They erected barricades and declared martial law, but they were trying to dam a flood with a handful of sand. The virus was already inside the walls. The very soldiers sent to enforce order became vectors for the disease, their disciplined ranks dissolving into chaos. The Crimson Dawn was not just the name of the sickness, it was the name of our new reality. It was the color of the sky, hazed with the smoke of burning cities. It was the color of the eyes of the things that now hunted us. It was the color of the world's end. The cities were the first to die. They were our pride, our monuments to civilization. They were also our tombs. The sheer density of human life made them perfect incubators for the crimson flu. Millions of people packed into towering structures of steel and glass became millions of opportunities for the virus to leap from host to host. The intricate systems that kept a metropolis alive, power grids, water treatment plants, supply chains, were surprisingly fragile. They required constant human oversight. When the people who ran those systems fell ill or fled, the systems ground to a halt. The lights went out, the water stopped flowing, the cities began to rot from the inside out. The streets, once rivers of yellow cabs and hurried pedestrians, became silent battlegrounds. The initial chaos was a storm of sirens, gunshots, and screams. That noise eventually faded, replaced by an even more terrifying quiet. It was a silence broken only by the wind whistling through empty skyscrapers and the distant, guttural cries of the infected. Cars were left abandoned where they ran out of fuel, creating massive, immovable blockades. Food stores were looted within days, their shelves stripped bare. What was once a symbol of human achievement had become a wasteland, a concrete graveyard haunted by the ghosts of what we were. The military's attempts to establish safe zones were catastrophic failures. They concentrated people, creating irresistible targets for the infected. The walls they built to keep the monsters out ended up trapping the infection in. Each safe zone became a pressure cooker of fear and disease, eventually collapsing in a wave of violence and contagion. The lesson was learned too late. Density was death. To survive, you had to get away. You had to leave the cities behind. Humanity scattered to the winds, fleeing the urban centers that had defined our existence for centuries. We became a species of refugees running from our own creations. Now the cities are no-go zones. They are vertical tombs where the infected wander in vast, mindless herds. The promise of leftover supplies might tempt the desperate or the foolish, but it is a deadly gamble. Every corner could hide a pack of them. Every darkened doorway could be an ambush. The great metropolises of the world, New York, London, Tokyo, are now just names on a map, markers of where millions perished. They stand as silent, decaying monuments to our arrogance, a stark reminder that the bigger you build your world, the harder it falls when the foundations give way. The infected are creatures of instinct, but their instincts are sharpened by the dark. During the day, they are dangerous enough. They shamble and wander, drawn by sound and movement. They are sluggish, their crimson eyes squinting in the sunlight. You can sometimes see a flicker of the person they once were in their clumsy movements, a pathetic echo of a life lost. Daylight is a reprieve, a time for caution and careful movement. It offers the illusion of safety, a chance to scavenge, to travel, to breathe. But it is only an illusion. The real danger comes when the sun goes down. Night transforms them. As darkness falls, the infected become faster, stronger, and more cunning. The sluggish shamble becomes a terrifying, loping run. Their senses heighten. They can hear the softest footstep, smell the scent of living flesh from 100 yards away. The night is their domain. It is when they hunt in packs, their guttural snarls and shrieks echoing through the desolate landscape. For survivors, sundown is a deadline. You must be behind walls, hidden and silent, before the last rays of light disappear. To be caught out in the open after dark is a death sentence. Darkness has become more than just the absence of light. It is an active, malevolent force. It is the cloak that hides the monsters. It is a symbol of the fear that gnaws at the heart of every survivor. Every creak of a floorboard, every rustle of leaves outside is magnified 1,000 times in the blackness. The psychological toll is immense. Sleep offers no escape, as nightmares are filled with red eyes and snapping teeth. The constant nightly siege wears you down, eroding your sanity piece by piece. You learn to fear the setting of the sun more than anything else. This new rhythm of life, activity by day, terror by night, has fundamentally changed us. We have become a diurnal species out of necessity, our lives dictated by the movement of the sun. We are like our primitive ancestors, huddled around a fire, listening to the sounds of predators in the darkness. The world is no longer ours. We are just visitors, borrowing the daylight hours from the true masters of the night. Every sunrise is a victory, a temporary truce in a war that never ends. It is a promise of a few more hours of life before the shadows return to claim the world once more. In this broken world, I learned a simple code. Trust no one. People are a liability. A group makes noise. A group needs resources. A group has internal conflicts, jealousies, and weaknesses that can get you killed. I saw it happen too many times in the early days. I saw good people make stupid mistakes out of compassion. I saw strong groups torn apart by a single moment of fear. So I chose a different path. I chose solitude. I became a drifter, a ghost moving through the ruins of the old world. My only companion was the road and the hum of my truck's engine. It was a lonely existence, but it was a safe one. My rules were simple and absolute. Rule 1. Never stay in one place for more than a day. Familiarity breeds complacency, and complacency is a killer. I would scavenge what I needed, canned food, gasoline, ammunition, and move on before dawn. Rule 2. Avoid all contact. A distant figure on the horizon was a reason to change direction. A plume of smoke in the sky was a warning, not an invitation. Other survivors were just as dangerous as the infected, sometimes more so. They were unpredictable, they were desperate, and desperation makes people do terrible things. My life was a monotonous cycle of driving, scavenging, and hiding. I talked to myself to keep from forgetting the sound of a human voice. I read old books and magazines I found in abandoned houses to keep my mind sharp. I maintained my gear with religious devotion because a jammed rifle or a dead battery was a death sentence. I became an expert at reading the landscape, at spotting signs of danger, at moving without a sound. I was a predator in a world of predators, but I only hunted for cans of beans and bottles of water. I was surviving, but I wasn't truly living. The cost of this isolation was a piece of my own humanity. I hadn't had a real conversation in years. I had forgotten what it felt like to laugh with someone, to share a meal, to feel the warmth of another person's presence. There was a cold, hard knot in my chest, where my heart used to be. I told myself it was a necessary adaptation, a callus I had grown to protect myself. But sometimes, in the dead of night, huddled in the back of my truck, the silence would press in on me. The loneliness would be a physical weight, heavier than any fear of the infected. I was alive, but I was haunted by the ghost of the man I used to be. I found the hospital by accident. My truck had run out of fuel miles from anywhere, and I was on foot, moving through a decaying suburban sprawl. I saw it on a hill, a squat brick building with boarded-up windows, Mercy General Hospital. An iron gate, chained and barricaded, blocked the entrance. It looked abandoned, but as I got closer, I saw a faint flickering light in a third-story window. It was a violation of every survival rule, a beacon in the dark. Against my better judgment, I was drawn to it. The loneliness had finally become too much to bear. Maybe, just maybe, this was a chance to feel human again. Getting inside was a test. I circled the perimeter, my rifle ready, studying the makeshift defenses. I found a weak spot, a section of fence I could climb. Once over, I moved through the overgrown courtyard, a graveyard of abandoned gurneys and medical waste bins. The front doors were chained shut, but a side entrance was slightly ajar. I slipped inside, into the suffocating silence, and the sterile smell of antiseptic mixed with decay. The air was thick with the ghosts of the past, the frantic energy of an emergency room, the quiet suffering of the sick. Now, it was just a tomb. They found me before I found them. A man with a shotgun and a woman with a crossbow appeared from the shadows, their faces grim and tired. They were tense, their weapons steady. I raised my hand slowly, showing I was not a threat. My drifter's instinct screamed at me to run, to fight my way out. But a deeper, long-buried instinct held me in place. The man, a former security guard named Frank, led me upstairs. The woman, a nurse named Sarah, watched my back, her eyes missing nothing. They took me to their sanctuary, a fortified section of the maternity ward. There were about a dozen of them, a collection of broken people, refugees from the fallen world. There was a teacher, a mechanic, a scared teenager, and an old man who just stared at the wall. They were a microcosm of society, trapped together in this brick asylum. They looked at me with a mixture of suspicion and desperate hope. I was an unknown quantity, a potential threat. But I was also new blood, a new pair of hands, a new gun. Sarah, their unofficial leader, explained their situation. They were low on food, lower on medicine, and their perimeter was breached by the infected almost every night. They were hanging on by a thread. The hospital was a fortress, but it was also a cage. The group had survived this long through rigid discipline and routine. Frank, the guard, organized the watches, his voice a low growl of authority. Sarah, the nurse, rationed the dwindling medical supplies, her hands steady, even as her face was etched with worry. Every day was a struggle. The primary task was reinforcing the barricades. We used old hospital beds, filing cabinets, anything heavy to block the doors and windows on the lower floors. The work was grueling, and the constant sound of our hammering was a dinner bell for any infected in the area. Supplies were the currency of life, and we were nearly bankrupt. The hospital's pantry had been picked clean long ago. The remaining food consisted of canned goods scavenged from nearby houses, a dangerous enterprise that had already cost them 2 of their members. Every can of soup, every bottle of water was rationed with painful precision. Hunger was a constant dull ache in our stomachs. It made people irritable, short-tempered. A dropped can of peaches was a catastrophe. An argument over who got the last cracker could escalate into a shouting match. The physical siege from the outside was matched by a siege of deprivation from within. The greatest danger, however, was not the monsters or the hunger. It was the fear. At night, the hospital came alive with their sounds. The scraping of claws on brick, the guttural, wet snarls from the courtyard below, the sickening thud of bodies throwing themselves against the barricaded doors. Sleep was a luxury few could afford. We would sit in the dark, rifles in hand, listening. Every shadow seemed to move. Every creak of the old building was a monster breaking through. The psychological pressure was relentless, grinding us down, fraying our nerves until they were raw. This constant state of terror began to crack the fragile unity of the group. People started whispering, they formed small cliques. They cast suspicious glances at one another. The mechanic, a man named Henderson, started hoarding small items, batteries, a box of bandages. The teenager, Leo, would break down into silent, shaking sobs when the nightly assault began. Trust, the essential glue holding them together, was dissolving. The question hung unspoken in the air. When the food runs out, when the next big wave hits, who will you sacrifice to save yourself? The walls of Mercy General were strong, but the walls we were building between each other were becoming insurmountable. The true test of survival isn't fighting the things outside, it's fighting the thing that grows inside you. It's the cold, pragmatic calculus that begins to whisper in your ear when you're starving and terrified. I saw it happening to everyone, including myself. Frank, the guard, grew more authoritarian with each passing day. His rules became harsher, his punishments more severe. He saw threats everywhere, not just from the infected, but from within our own ranks. He argued that discipline was the only thing keeping us alive, but his iron fist was creating fractures, breeding resentment where we desperately needed unity. He was trying to save us, but he was becoming a tyrant. Humanity is a fragile thing. It needs to be nurtured with compassion and hope. Two resources that were in shorter supply than ammunition. I watched as people who were once neighbors and friends began to see each other as rivals. A dispute over a shared blanket turned ugly. A rumor about someone hiding food led to a search of their meager belongings, a violation that shattered what little trust remained. The trauma of what we had all seen, all lost, was a poison in our veins. Some people retreated into silence, their eyes vacant. Others lashed out in anger and paranoia. We were all infected, not by the virus, but by the fear it had created. Then came the other survivors. A small, heavily armed group appeared at our gate one afternoon. They weren't asking for shelter, they were making demands. They had scouted the hospital and knew we had supplies. Their leader, a man with a cold smile and dead eyes, gave us an ultimatum. Give them half our food and all our medicine, or they would tear down our gates and take everything. Suddenly, the monsters outside seemed like a manageable problem. The infected were predictable. They were driven by a simple, mindless hunger. Humans, on the other hand, were capable of cruelty, of calculated malice. They could reason, and they could use that reason to justify any atrocity. This new threat forced a terrible choice upon us. Frank wanted to fight. He argued that showing any weakness would be a death sentence. Others, led by the teacher, argued for negotiation, for giving them what they wanted in the hope they would leave us in peace. Sarah was torn between the two, trying to find a path that wouldn't get them all killed. The debate was fierce, turning friends against friends. We were facing a war on two fronts, against the infected outside and the ruthless humans at our gate. But the most dangerous battle was the one raging inside the maternity ward, the battle for our own souls. Who were we willing to become to see another sunrise? The ultimatum from the other survivors expired at sundown. As the last sliver of orange and purple faded from the sky, a profound and terrible silence fell over the hospital. We had made our choice. We would not give in. To do so would be to die slowly instead of quickly. Frank had positioned our best shooters at the windows, their rifles aimed at the gate. I stood beside him, my own rifle feeling heavy in my hands. I had spent years avoiding this, avoiding other people. Now I was about to fight and possibly die for a group of strangers I had known for less than a week. The irony was not lost on me. The night exploded. The rival group didn't just attack the gate, they were clever. They used noise, a string of firecrackers, a blaring car horn, to draw a massive herd of infected toward the hospital. It was a strategy born of pure malice. They were using the monsters as a weapon, creating a tidal wave of chaos to cover their own assault. The air filled with a symphony of horror. The roar of the infected horde, the crack of rifle fire from both sides, and the splintering of wood as the barricades began to give way under the sheer weight of bodies. It was the longest night of our lives. Inside, it was controlled panic. Sarah raced from person to person, patching up wounds with what little she had. Henderson, the mechanic, worked frantically to reinforce a buckling door, his face slick with sweat. Even Leo, the terrified teenager, found his courage, running ammunition from our small stockpile to the shooters at the windows. In the face of a common, overwhelming threat, the petty squabbles and suspicions evaporated. We were no longer a collection of individuals. We were a single organism, fighting with one mind, one purpose: to live. We were a family, forged in the fires of this hellish night. The darkness is absolute, broken only by the muzzle flashes of our guns. The horde is endless. For every one we put down, 3 more take its place. The rival survivors are using the chaos to probe our defenses, trying to find a way in. Ammunition is running low, the barricades are groaning. The fear is a cold, metallic taste in my mouth. But as I look at the faces around me, grim, terrified but resolute, I feel something I haven't felt in years. Hope. It is a fragile, flickering candle in an ocean of darkness, but it is there. Who will last until the morning? I don't know the answer, but for the first time in a long time, I know we will face the dawn.